Welcome back to another episode of Mortgage Mondays, where we believe, apart from your family, your mortgage and your house are probably the biggest investments you're going to make, so it doesn't hurt to know a little bit more. I'm your host, Mason Kealy, and today we're going to be talking to Michael Cairns from Innotech Windows Doors, and he's going to be talking to us about something very interesting called passive homes. Now, this isn't the opposite of an aggressive home. I don't know a lot about it, but I do know that from the sounds of it, they're the future of homes. They're very efficient, very economical when it comes to saving on heating and cooling. And, you know, in BC, we get a lot of chilly weather, you know, right? And the summers aren't as hot as some places in Canada, but we can get really cold out here. And especially, you know, cold with the rain, the chill really sets in. So might not hurt to have a look at one of these passive homes, or at least talk to your contractor about it. Without any further ado, then let's reach out to Mike and tap him in here, and we'll figure out what these are all about. Hey, Mike, and welcome to the show. It's nice to meet you.
Thanks, Mason. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So one of the key questions that I had for you is, what's a passive house? Because the only time I've ever heard it was from you, and I know it's not the opposite of an aggressive house, right? So I really don't know, but you know what? We do have a lot of listeners that are doing construction mortgages, that are, you know, they're building their own place, working with contractors, and, you know, maybe a passive house is right for them. You know, maybe could you give us a little description of what it is?
Sure. It's kind of an interesting concept. It started here in Canada with the Saskatchewan Conservation House in 1977. And then the Germans saw what we did and kind of perfected the model and came up with this really well-developed system that now has come back to Canada. And the first passive house in Canada was built in 2010. And since then, it's really taken off. We're one of the largest growing passive house markets in the world, actually, here in the Vancouver region. So it's partly due to the weather. Because of Canada's climate, we tend to spend a lot of money on heating, and the passive house concept is really about improving the indoor comfort. So there's 5 principles to the construction of a passive house. So you concentrate on continuous insulation, continuous air seal layer, having no thermal bridges, high performance glazing, and a mechanical ventilation system. So what that all means, by having continuous insulation, it means you're going to keep the heat in. The same thing with an airtight assembly. Some of the traditional thought with a home is that if you have an airtight home, it traps in condensation, but that's only true if you get cold spots in the home, if it's poorly insulated, if it has thermal bridges. But if you have a well-built, well-designed wall assembly, you actually have no risk to the building at all. You're going to have no condensation. You're never going to get sweating on the windows in a passive home. You're never going to get cold spots. Like, you know, sometimes people will think, oh, in this corner of the house, it's really, really cold. You know, you never get drafts in a passive house. You don't get cold feet on the floor because it takes in all the physics of thermal comfort. So it says if your feet are cold and your head is hot, you feel uncomfortable. So it makes sure that all the temperatures are balanced and everything works according to comfort. So that's really the concept.
So, I'm getting a bit of. All right. Well, so my question is then, so normally, like when you get cold spots or drafts or whatnot, isn't that normally like the windows? Maybe your windows aren't good enough or whatnot, or is it the actual insulation of the house?
It's a combination of things. Usually the biggest weak spot in a house is often the windows. You might have walls that are maybe an R15, but your average window out there that builders are using today are only an R2, maybe an R3 if it's a very good window. So the windows are a huge weak spot in the envelope. And a passive house window is going to be R7 and up. And some windows, depending on the glass, can be up in the maybe R12, R14 range. So you can get windows now that are going to be as warm on the inside surface as an average wall is going to be in a regular house.
So are they a lot more expensive?
They are more expensive, but you know, as we build more and as more supply becomes available, prices always come down. So what we're generally seeing is that the cost of building a passive house, if you plan it out correctly, if you're smart as a builder and as a designer, you can achieve cost parity. And in some cases, you may actually be able to deliver a home for a lower cost, because when you have this super insulated home that blocks out all the heat in the summer and retains all the heat in the winter, you don't need an air conditioning system. You don't need a big forced air heating system. You actually just need, in the case of my own passive home that I live in, I have two small electric fireplaces and a tiny little hydronic unit that hooks up to my hot water tank. So there's actually no heating system in the house as you would traditionally consider it. Exactly. There's no furnace. There's no baseboard heaters. There's none of that stuff. And the actual cost of heating on average, the maximum limit for a passive house is 15 kilowatts per square meter. And to give you an idea of what that actually means, the average across Canada is 250 kilowatts per square meter per year. So it's better than 90% lower heating cost compared to the average in the country.
So why isn't everyone doing it then like that? Because it sounds really good, right?
Yeah. Most of the time, you know, construction is an old industry, and there's a lot of new things that have been brought in the past that maybe weren't very well thought out, and so people took hits. It can turn out badly. With the passive house, fortunately, it's been in regular practice across Europe for more than 30 years, and in Canada for 10 years already. And so there's a pretty good background in history. So we know that it works functionally. We know that it works in practice, and we know that it's buildable. So it's not something that builders should be scared of. It's just that maybe they haven't come across it yet and don't yet know of it. But it's the future. You know, the step code already tells us you're moving from step 1 to 5. Step 5 is about the same as passive house standard, and you're for sure going to have to be there by 2030. So
can are passive homes just homes, or can it be other construction? Can it be like, you know, I'm sure it could be a duplex, but what about if you're getting into like, you know, like a string of townhouses or like a small apartment building or whatnot? Can you create those as passive?
Absolutely. What's really intriguing, we have the term passive house. It's an anglicization of the German term passive Haus. Haus there means building, not house. So we already have here in the Lower Mainland, we have the Clayton Community Centre in Surrey is built to the passive house standard. We've got a number of large condo towers that are passive house. Vancouver is going to have the tallest passive house building in the world, built here in the next couple of years.
Wow.
It's already underway. So everything from a tiny little laneway house all the way up to high rises and large municipal buildings. There's in Red Deer, Alberta, there's actually a passive house car dealership, which is pretty crazy because that includes the mechanics bays, like the repair center, which is pretty.
You actually do the doors and windows for these passive homes then, and you guys will, like, say for instance, if someone's doing a construction and they've got a contractor, if they want to look at maybe doing it as a passive home, they get you guys to do an estimate or a consultation with the construction contractor? Is that the way it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So we manufacture doors and windows to the Passive House standard, and we've got a range of products. But the key concept is that it's a higher performance glazing. It's a more insulated frame, so you get a really high level of performance, and they're super airtight and super watertight. So in the worst possible conditions, you will never see water coming into your home. They've got very high structural values, so they're safe for a lot of different project types. And working directly in the Passive House world means we have to have a fair bit of expertise, and so we like to work on a consultative basis with builders and designers. So if you have questions about windows and even just Passive House projects in general, there's a lot of background involvement that we've had, and we can certainly help you out and dial it down to maybe the best product to suit your project.
Just listening to it, being a layman, I'm not a contractor. I don't build homes. I build mortgages, right? But I almost put the logic behind it similar to like buying an electric car, right? Like it might be a little bit more than your average car, but you're not paying for gas anymore, right? And electricity is cheaper. So over the lifetime of it, you're gonna save a lot more, right? Where it sounds like, even if a Passive House, like if you can even get it at parity, then you're going to come out ahead after 10 years, aren't you?
Absolutely. We found it really interesting in Europe. They actually have, because the product is so well known, there's a lot of banks that actually will allow for the typical savings that you get from a passive home to be included when the mortgage calculation is done. So they'll say, well, we know you're going to save about $250 a month on energy costs, so we're not going to assume that $250 in your costing the way that they normally would here.
Yeah, figuring out that way. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Mike, thank you very much for coming out. I really appreciate it. This is a very cool subject. I don't know a lot about it, but I'm sure there's people that are building, that want to make some quality places that are gonna, cut on their expenses, especially if you've got people that are going into retirement, and they don't want to be spending an arm and a leg over our chilly winters.
Yeah.
So I will definitely get people to reach out to you at Innotech, and hey, thank you very much for coming out. That was very cool.
Absolutely. It was great to talk to you.
Wonderful. Have a great night.
You too.